good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to your favorite time of the month, Driving Success. We have a special treat for the rest of 2024. We are introducing our mini series, The 5 Pieces to Compliance. And this month, the piece of the puzzle we're going to be covering is the big file cabinet or the cloud drive with your driver qualification files. And we're going to cover some basics of DQ files, details about the 3 stages of a DQ file, gaps that are common in the industry as we talk to prospects and customers, as well as some of the best practices to ensure you're ready to rock your next audit. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So real quick, we're going to do driver qualification files, 101 here. So who needs a DQ file? So any driver with a commercial driver's license who is operating a commercial vehicle outlined by the FMCSA. What is a driver file? It consists of onboarding, safety, and eligibility documents for your driver. And then what's the retention period, right? So 3 years, unless it's an onboarding document, you need to keep that to show the auditor that you are performing your onboarding to FMCSA standards. And then where do you need to store them, right? There's no regulation about where or how you store your DQ files. They just need to be readily available if you're selected for an audit. So that's our DQF 101. Probably know most of this information, but we just want to set a good pace for the rest of the webinar. Oh, it went backwards on me. That's not what I like. So essentially, a DQ file should really show the full life cycle of a driver, from their application, when they're a current driver, the rest of the files that they need, renewals such as driver's license or medical cards, and then also an audit as well. So why are DQ files important? Why should you as a company ensure you are completing the steps outlined by the FMCSA? Well, it mitigates risks and helps avoid penalties. The FMCSA's driver qualification requirement is not just a list of extra tasks for your safety and onboarding team to complete. It ensures proper vetting of your drivers, and your drivers are arguably the face of your company. They are the ones who are driving, literally and figuratively, the profitability of your commodities. So if you have a driver who does not take the safety of themselves and others on the road seriously, you'll be able to determine that with the onboarding requirements a DOT driver must follow and a company must go through, outlined by the FMCSA. So this leads to them having an overall high safety, health, and culture for your company. Your drivers really are one of the biggest factors in your CSA scores or determining if your company is at risk of closure or getting fined. So ensuring that you're following the driver qualification file requirements it's really beneficial for your company to do. So let's go into the 3 stages of DQ files, and the first is onboarding. This is a process in its own, and there's many steps and checks that need to be completed before a driver can even get behind the wheel. A company must collect an employment application, which we'll come back to that on the next slide. To send the driver, they need to send the driver for a pre-employment drug and alcohol test. They need to run a clearinghouse query to determine if there has been any history of drug or alcohol testing refusal or failures. They also need to conduct a road test and run an MVR to determine if a driver has any disqualifying accidents or citations. Some documents are considered part of the onboarding process, but a company has some time to perform their checks and balances after hiring a driver, and that includes the safety verification from previous employers. But we're going to throw it on this list of onboarding documents. So I want to go back to the DOT application requirement, as this is an area that our company, our solution DQM, really tends to see some disconnect with in the industry when talking to clients. So if we compare a typical, just regular employment application and a DOT application, we can see there are definitely some things missing from an employment application that a company utilizes for the rest of their employees, right? Not everything on this list is necessarily going to be missing from an employment application, but what we've seen in the industry, this is typically the most common things that we see missing. So we see this is pretty common, that the HR department has a really awesome HR system, right? They have their onboarding packed down, and it's amazing for payroll, it's amazing for recruiting employees and holding employee files, but it doesn't necessarily speak DOT. It speaks HR, right? It speaks HR regulations. So I like to describe it that way because of the type of operations and industry we work in. There's two regulating entities, HR and DOT. HR regulations are their own expertise in their own, in their own way. They have to follow certain regulations federally and state to make sure that they're meeting HR requirements. And unfortunately, the people who set HR regulations and the people who set DOT regulations don't have weekly touch base meetings to get on the same page. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. So we're kind of stuck living in these two different worlds, trying to make both of these entities happy. We could spend a whole webinar on just the application, but from this chart, we can see that there's a lot of things that a DOT application requires that a normal employment application doesn't. So the kind of next stage after onboarding your driver is there's some ongoing management of their DQ files, and there are some requirements for a DQ file that needs to be maintained either annually, periodically, or randomly. An MVR, for example, is required to be pulled annually and reviewed with your driver. If you're in California, you're a California carrier, this will be your EPN that is sent by the DMV, but it's still the same process. You need to review it with your driver and check it off. Having this annual requirement is actually helpful in the case your driver was involved in an accident or received a citation either off the clock or even on the clock that you may not be aware of. And you're able to kind of mitigate that safety, if it's a possible safety risk, a little sooner than 364 days after you pulled their last MVR. The next thing that really needs to be managed is a driver's license. I mean, this is kind of a main thing that qualifies a driver to drive the type of vehicle that they are assigned to. So depending on the state, it will determine how often this must be renewed. But, the driver's license needs to remain active in order to eliminate any issues with credentials, getting stopped on the side of the road, saying, hey, you can't operate this, you have an expired license. The next part of the ongoing management is the FMCSA clearinghouse. This is fairly new. I think it's been around for 4 years now. But a new query is required once a year to check for any new drug or alcohol offenses that your driver or your medical review officer have not reported to your safety team. Random drug testing. So this isn't an annual requirement for every driver in the way that it's random. So who is going to be chosen isn't necessarily going to be the same driver. It may not a driver may never be selected for a random, essentially. The current rate is 25% of your driver roster must be tested for drug testing at a random selection, right? So this should be done evenly throughout the year. So for example, quarterly, you should do your randoms. And some drivers, like I said, may be less lucky and have to do a random testing more often than others, but that's why it's random. The next part is medical card. So a medical card should be renewed every other year, and a driver must see a registered medical professional to conduct that medical exam. With this renewal in particular, there is an additional requirement to go to the FMCSA registry to check if the medical professional conducting the renewal is on the authorized list outlined by the FMCSA. And then we have our additional credentials, such as TWIC or hazmat, TSA hazmat credentials. Also needs to be tracked to ensure credentials are up to date to accommodate the needs of the company. So the last kind of stage of driver files, if we're looking at a higher level, is if a driver is undergoing an audit. We have our audit preparation, we have during our audit, and then we have our post-audit routines. And everyone's looks a little bit differently depending on, what system they're using and how on top of your driver file regulations and your compliance manager is. But most of the time when a company is informed of an audit, it's usually a stressful and pretty resource-heavy event for your team. So we covered the main aspects of a driver file, which was at a high level really, and itself was a lot of information and can take someone years of industry experience to really nail down the regulations. So what is the industry struggling with? What are the gaps we tend to see with companies that are causing them to experience violations, fines, and can hurt them in a case involving an injury? Having incomplete documentation. So this is an easy fix. Things like employment applications tend to have some missing information. The onboarding process tends to be at an accelerated pace just because of the type of industry you're in. Both drivers and admin can possibly miss some steps or sections of an application, and this can cause fines during an audit, as well as leave some gaps in that vetting process that we talked about a little bit earlier to ensure your drivers are, performing at a safety health that you would like for your company. Then we have our out-of-date files. We talked about the documents that need to be updated both annually and periodically, and sometimes these get missed. This can be because a company is using an outdated tracking method, or they may just not be aware of the DOT requirements. Inadequate verification. So every document that goes into a driver file must be reviewed by safety admin of some sort. From application to medical variance document, it must be reviewed for completion and accuracy. On top of that, there are some documents that must undergo an additional check for compliance that some companies do not complete. For example, a safety verification when hiring a driver, a company must complete 3 attempts to contact a previous employer for safety and employment information. Sometimes this gets missed, or they don't do their 3 attempts, or they don't get a response from the previous employer, which that's not at fault of your company for reaching out and not gaining a response, but you need to be able to track that, that you've done your 3 attempts, you've done your due diligence. The next is record retention. So the standard is 3 years for driver files, but this can be a little bit misleading when handling onboarding documents. A company needs to retain documentation, needs to retain onboarding documentations to show an auditor that they're following the correct onboarding requirements outlined by the FMCSA. And then we have ignoring violations, just flat out ignoring them. So now this one is kind of an obvious, please don't do this. But if you if you're aware of a violation or not making the corrections to fix it, obviously it's going to lead to more violations and fines. But this can also just simply be a result of poor communication between departments. An individual may not relay the violation to the proper channels to fix the problems, so it continues to be an ongoing issue until it becomes a bigger issue, and then it's a lot more to handle. And then lastly, we have new regulations, right? The FMCSA is constantly working to improve the safety and regulation for the industry. And this can lead to some confusion since things can change fairly quickly. So having a compliance partner is helpful to ensure all changes are communicated and updated properly. So to avoid the gaps we just talked about, here are some best practices when dealing with driver files. So find a perfect partner and solution. So here's my my shameless plug of DQM for our driver file qualification software. DQM Connect is a driver files made simple. Having a great solution that helps make driver files simple will exponentially help your compliance. If you're still storing driver files through a paper system and using calendar notification, there's going to be a larger chance that something's going to get missed, something's not going to get updated properly, and lead to, possibly a driver getting dispatched without an updated license. So using that compliance software will exponentially reduce that chance for error. Next is having a consistent review process. So having a consistent review workflow will help eliminate any missing information slipping through the cracks. Again, I'm going to mention DQM as we have built in checks and balances to ensure that documents that are frequently incomplete, like a driver application, are not passed through without being completed properly. Documentation of efforts, right? So like we mentioned, the safety verifications, sometimes things don't always work out how they should. From when sometimes the previous employer won't respond to the requests. And as long as you are documenting your attempt, then you have done your due diligence to remain compliant. Another example is the FMCSA Clearinghouse madness when that first launched that new program. The website was not really structured to handle as much traffic as it was getting, so things crashed, accounts had to be cleared out and remade, and overall it was kind of a mess. So this caused a lot of issues with companies not being able to complete the new requirements that were put into place. But as long as the company showed their attempt of compliance, the auditors understood and kind of let them, let it slide for that year till the website was up and running properly. Then we have scheduled audits. So conducting internal audits on a consistent schedule is huge to catch any gaps in compliance. Either monthly, quarterly is a good practice. So having a program that makes audits easy is helpful for this, since an audit, whether whether internal or DOT, can be pretty time consuming. So another good practice to participate is in an NBR and CSA monitoring program. The FMCSA requirement is annually to pull an NBR and review, but like we talked about earlier, that leaves 364 days of a gap on knowing if a violation has occurred for your driver. So participating in a monitoring program can avoid visibility gaps, it can avoid increased risk, missing off-duty events, and wrongful incidents that can affect your safety score. It can help your company gain the chance for proactive training, eliminate those surprises, increase your safety culture and score, and protect your company if there happens to be a case out, and increase the retention of your drivers. So DQM does offer a monitoring with our software, so definitely a good practice to have. So that's our DQ files portion here. I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for any questions. If anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot them in either the chat or the Q&A. It should be, I believe it's at the top of your screen as well, if you have any questions. We have about 10 minutes kind of scheduled out for anyone. Or did I just do such a good job that we have no questions? I'm just pouring education out. Let's see. Great. Well, if we have no questions for today, we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you everyone for taking some time to talk about DQ files. This is just one piece in our mini series, the 5 pieces of DOT compliance. So stay on the lookout for, oh, let's see, we have a question here. Is there a limit on drivers? For like driver files, or a limit on drivers for what exactly? If you're talking about the DQM software, there isn't a limit on those files, as long as, same with the NVR and CSA monitoring, you can have your whole roster in there. Great. Well, like I said, thank you for joining us. Please be on the lookout for our next month's webinar. We're going to have a guest speaker, Geo Tab, to talk about hours of service. So we're super excited for that. And everyone, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.